Preparing live stream webinar. Setting up your webinar. I'll let you know when it's, you should be able to see it on Facebook too. And there we go.
Cool. Well, hello, everybody. You are listening to Human Potential at Work, and I have Doug Foresta joining me again today, and we're going to talk about getting stuck. We've been having some very interesting conversations about why people get stuck and, you know, how you can get stuck, how you actually can cause yourself to get stuck. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. So Doug, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you, Deborah. It's great to be here. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's fun to be doing it on Facebook Live. So we're doing this on Facebook Live, and then we're going to take the audio and we're going to, you know, send it out to the radio programs we're on and the iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play as well. So also, right, something for everybody, and making them fully accessible, making sure we're transcribing everything. So it's very exciting. And of course, because we're live, anyone that is on Facebook right now that wants to join the conversation, you know, we always love to bring you into it. So, all right. So, Doug, let's talk about the story. You had told me a story about a friend of yours on Facebook. Maybe we should start there because it's a pretty sad and powerful story all at the same time.
Sure. You know, we were talking the other day, and I came across someone that I had worked with for many years in an old job that I used to have. And she was saying that she was just, you know, I can't take it anymore. And so I asked, you know, what's wrong and what's going on? And a lot of people started jumping in to the conversation. And she said, you know, it's a low-paid job, and it was a social work position. You know, it's a low-paid job. And of course, you know, I'll tell people go back to the should we be paid well for social good conversation. But aside from that, you know, I just saw what people were posting, and this one woman had posted about just saying, you know, I can't, I'm, you know, I don't like my job. I don't like my position. I don't want children to get hurt or anything, but I'm not, you know, I'm really not going to go above and beyond. I'm just waiting it out because I'm stuck, because I only have a bachelor's degree and I need the retirement and I'm stuck. And, you know, the thing about it is this woman's in her 30s. So it's not like, I mean, waiting it out. I mean, if she was 67, you know, and it was 6 months or something, that would be one thing. But you're talking about, you know, 30 years.
Right.
And what you're waiting out is your life. And
Right.
You know, and in this entrepreneurial journey that, you know, that I'm on in my business, you know, there's times when it's not a 9-to-5 job and you're constantly going. But when I saw that, it just made me think about how grateful I am for the choices that I've made along the way. And also just the idea that when we tell ourselves that we're stuck, and we're stuck because I don't have a bachelor's, or we're stuck because it doesn't matter what it is, right?
I have a disability.
I have a disability,
because people don't understand me. I'm stuck because I didn't go to college, or I don't have enough college, or I'm overweight, or, I mean, there's a billion reasons why people decide they're stuck. Doug, I don't know where this came from. Maybe I'll give my dad, who's passed over, credit for this, but my dad did tell me when I was a little girl that I could accomplish anything that I wanted. And he was very, very supportive that way. And I always really appreciated my dad saying that to me. And I remember when I got out of high school and I hadn't gone to college, and I didn't graduate from college. I am one of those people, I guess, could have been stuck because I didn't completely graduate. But one thing that I got this job, and I got this really well-paid job at the time. It was a long time ago. It was $35,000, and it's a lot of money. But this is when I was 19 years old. So that tells you a long time ago. It was a lot of money, and I was an overseas operator for Southern Bell. And what we did, it was really sort of interesting. We would talk to other countries that were calling the U.S., and we would connect their phone calls. And we would also talk to the ships on the high seas, the cruise liners, and ship-to-ship calls. So it sounds fascinating, and it was. But it was just not my cup of tea. It's like if you needed to go to the restroom, you'd put a button up. If you wanted to take a break, you'd put a button up. If you wanted to leave, you put a button up, and then people coming in from shift changes would relieve you. And sometimes they would relieve you if they wanted to, because you were next to one of their friends. Anyway, I was not happy in the job. And I remember talking to a lot of people that had worked in this job for many, many years, including my mother, retired from AT&T. And so she was the one that had got me into this job. And so many people hated their job. They hated it. It was a long time ago, but they hated it. And I remember asking some of the women that were older than me, saying, well, if you hate your job, how come you're staying? And they're like, oh, because I have, a mortgage, and I have my car, and I got to pay for my kids' college. And what I was hearing is that you're stuck here because you can't afford to leave. And I get that, but I thought, I don't want that for my life. And so I actually, after working there a year, I quit. And I went and became a waitress while I continued going to school. And people would say, you're crazy. Why would you leave a job that was so well paid with all those benefits?
Right.
Well, I didn't like it. And I didn't want to get to the point where I was trapped in this job because I had, a mortgage and car. And I just didn't want to live my life that way. And I'll tell you, during my life, I actually at times did sometimes feel like I got stuck in a job. I remember a job I had when Sarah was a little baby, and we had just heard that she had trisomy 21, and I really wanted to stay home with her, but we couldn't afford to do it as a family. So there have been times when I felt stuck. But when you were telling me that story, it made me sad for that woman, because that's a long time to be stuck. But it also made me think about this community and human potential.
Right.
And, sometimes we feel stuck because people tell us we're stuck. Well, you can't do that because the fill in the blank, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. And one thing I think I've done a good job at, and I know you have too, Doug, because I've known you a long time, is I don't stay in situations where I'm really unhappy. If I'm at a job and I really need to believe in the employer I'm working for. I'm one of those people that I really need to believe in the company. And there have been times when I've lost faith in my company because things that they had done. Yeah. I remember working for this one company, a bank, and they were laying off all of these people that had lower paying jobs. And at the same time, the president and the COO of the company was, bragging that they just made this car that was, specifically made for them and exported from Germany. And I didn't want to be part of that company, because I didn't feel that company really valued the employees. And so I don't just quit impulsively. I learned years ago that didn't work. But I actually, I start making a plan so that I'm not stuck.
But, when we feel stuck, I think here's a couple things connected to human potential. Imagine if you had stayed in that job. Imagine if you had stayed in that good job, and you'd probably be making tons of money right now, right? And the thing is that what would the world have missed from all the contributions that you've made? It's not just about you, right? It's not just about us. When we stay stuck, we deny the world our real gifts. And the hard part about it is that I think of, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes,
and, for many of our, by the way, if you're listening to this live or after the fact, if you've read that book or you're familiar with the work, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can comment below. But, one of the things that he talked about is that even if everything else is taken away from you, even if he was in a concentration camp and all his freedom was taken away, the very last thing that can never be taken away is your attitude and your decision about what it's going to mean to you. So I remember he had worked with this man who had broken his neck and he was completely paralyzed from the neck down. And the man said, he goes, I broke my neck didn't break me.
Oh, good.
And he went back to college, and he went on and lived a good life, even though, right? We're we're not just saying there aren't things that don't, like he was stuck. He's stuck in his body, right? But he still had a choice about what it was going to mean to him. And so even if we're truly, truly stuck, let's say you're in a situation like, hey, right now I need to work at this job because I got to support my family and I can't just jump out of the job. You still have a choice about your attitude and about what that's going to mean to you, and how you're going to approach whatever the situation is. And,
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And you know, Doug, it's interesting because we definitely, you know, as I've walked my life, you know, there've been a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. There's been a lot of, you know, bad things thrown at me. There's been a lot of good, you know, it's a journey. But anytime that I get to the point where I am feeling really stuck, or that I'm being held back, and you know, sometimes when you feel sometimes you are being held back by others,
right.
But I always take a look at what's happening. What am I feeling? Is it real? So analyzing my thoughts, you know, is it real? Am I really stuck? And are you sure you can't add value right where you are? Because, you know, I read a lot of spiritual work and religious doctrine and stuff. And they're often talk about, you know, bloom where you planted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so maybe because I was in mortgage banking for many years and I did really well in that field, and I really liked it. And home ownership is an important thing. Going back to Frankel's book, I remember as I was reading it, as a diehard optimist, I thought it was very interesting that the optimists were really sort of the first, you know, to
go.
Yeah, they were the first to die, because it's almost like their optimism wound up really breaking them. And I thought that was so interesting. I had never thought about that perspective. And I remember when I was walking through a business failure, and it was such a hard walk and such a big failure to me. And one of my friends had said, do you think you could ever forgive yourself for that, Deborah? Because the people that were impacted, some of them are never going to forgive you. Some of them will. But can you forgive yourself? And I was like, I'm going to try to learn to. And, so when we always have risks, and we always have probably regrets in our life, you know, hopefully small regrets. But I do think it's very important to remember, though, no matter who we are, that you know, you can't let somebody else define your life and decide that you're stuck, because you have to accept that you're stuck. So that woman that you're talking about, she has decided she's stuck. Right. And I remember you were saying that, you know, sometimes when people get stuck, I'll give you another example instead of going on the path I was going to go. I remember my husband was also working for Southern Bell when we were in Florida years ago. And he was doing his job, and a couple of guys said, hey, let's go to lunch. And he's like, okay, because he was the new guy on the team. And they took him to lunch, and they said, listen, man, you're making us all look bad. You need to slow down. You know, don't work so hard, because if you work so hard, then they're going to give us more work to do. And they're going to start comparing us against you. And my husband got really discouraged by that, because he was working hard because he was really proud to be an employee. And he, you know, he felt that's what they were paying him to do, which it was. And so it's interesting sometimes when our coworkers are stuck and they almost want you to join them in this situation.
Misery loves company, right?
Yeah.
Because the other piece, I think what happens is, I think the word that I'm thinking of that we haven't mentioned is choice.
Yeah.
That we always have a choice, even if the choice is to accept. Even if the choice is to accept the situation, you know, we may not always have a choice. Well, and I think it's that piece about whose responsibility is your life. And you know, I don't want to. I'm careful to say this, because here I am, you know, able-bodied, you know, middle-class white guy. I'm very aware that I'm not trying to preach to our community, you know, to the community and say, you know, you need to take responsibility for your life. But I don't mean it in a preachy way. I just mean it in an existential way, that no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, we have a choice. Are we going to take responsibility for our lives, or are we going to define our lives by others?
Right. And even a situation that I've talked about before that I'm walking with Sarah right now. Sarah is now 30. She just had a birthday and she has trisomy 21, formerly known at our house as Down syndrome. And Sarah really wants to move out.
Yeah.
And so we're walking the path to figure out what options there are
Right.
for her. And it's interesting because Sarah is feeling stuck.
Yeah.
And so for years, I think this has been coming to, she's been having these frustrated feelings. She's been trying to talk to us about it. And when she talks to us, we're like, but Sarah, we love living with you. You should. So then you're like, okay, it's not that I don't want to live with you, but I want to get on with my life. And so you have all these things thrown at you where you're trying to figure it out. But I need to honor her by helping her figure out how to get unstuck. And she's not necessarily being realistic about the situation, but she doesn't have anything to compare it to. So I was talking to her the other day about an option that we found where she would have her own bedroom, and then there would be another woman that had her bedroom, and then they shared the common area, the kitchen and living room. And Sarah said, I don't want to live with anybody. I said, okay, Sarah. Well, it's not realistic for you to live alone.
The reason I'm laughing is because I think lots of 30-year-olds are in the position, whether they have trisomy, 21 or not. I don't want to live with someone. Okay, but the rents are,
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about the reality of the situation. And so so we're trying to help her understand that we don't want her to be stuck.
Right.
We want her to have options. But at some point, she's going to have to be realistic about her options. And that's not necessarily bad either. Like you said, sometimes we just have to accept the reality.
Right.
When we were first told that Sarah had trisomy 21, we didn't really want that to be the case.
Right.
One day I have this baby girl, I think is this one person. And then the next day the doctors say, no, she's actually this person. And by the way, trauma, sad, And so I don't think we're talking about avoiding our lives or running away from our lives or not being realistic about our lives, but it's sad when you hear stories like that. I'm stuck. I'm going to do the bare minimum I have to do in my job because I hate it. I resent it. I want to retire 30 years from now.
Sad. It's very sad because you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the things that's really interesting to me. And that's why I mentioned Viktor Frankl, because, it's not a situation where he was in a good situation or there weren't real limitations, that there weren't real limitations. But at the same time, we have so much more expanse of our lives. And a lot of it really is in our own attitude. And I remember him talking about, for example, I never forget this, I walk around, I live in a nice neighborhood, and I know you live in a rural area, and you can walk outside, you can just take a walk, right?
Right.
And we just don't even think about that. And I remember he talked about the first time he walked out of the camp and they were liberated. And he said, I just remember I walked and I walked and I walked as I walked past the soldiers, and I just walked into this open field, and he goes, I'd forgotten that it was beautiful outside, that all the time that I was in this camp, it was beautiful out. And he goes, I finally, at some point, I walked a mile in this field and I just fell to my knees. And he said the line from Psalms says, from the narrow places I called to you and you answered me from the expanse.
Right.
And to someone else somewhere, they're just sitting in a field and it's no big deal. And to him, it's like, it's amazing to feel that expanse. And I think that stuckness is not a bad thing. It means we're bumping up against something, right? We're bumping up against our own growth. Like for Sarah, she is coming to a place where she is wanting and needing to try out life for herself as much as possible. And that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And I love how you're saying we're bumping up against, life, because I was, as I'm trying to figure this out and make sure that Sarah has options, and I do need to do that for her. I do need to do that for her. But I was talking to another parent who has a daughter around a little bit younger than Sarah. And she said, there's studies that have said that, when, when a person like Sarah starts asking to move out and needs options and everything else, that at some point, if we don't listen, she'll stop asking.
Yeah.
And that made me feel very sad because even though Sarah might not be able to say, she said it now, but as she was trying to understand in her own mind what she was feeling, and she was trying to explain it to us in a way she didn't want to hurt our feelings, and and she does have an intellectual disability. I'm not in denial of that. So as she was trying to tell me in her way, it was, I wanted certainly to honor her by listening, but at the same time, how do I support her as we're walking the path to get unstuck? Because sometimes I remember when my company Tech Access was absorbed by SSB. SSB is a great company, just got a wonderful investment, $40 million, and they're wonderful. But it wasn't where I wanted to be. I knew that I wanted to do something else. And so there were times when I was feeling stuck, but I knew, how do you get out of stuck? How have I in the past got out of stuck? And it's like, I have this illusion of control, right? And so making a plan. Okay, so fine. So if you don't want to do that, what do you want to do? And by the way, while you're there working for this company, just using working as an example, can you add more value? Can you be vigilant to make sure that as you're feeling stuck, that it is not impacting this company that's actually paying you to work for them, and you should honor them for that. So to me, you have to have a plan to get out of the stuckness, but you need to be authentic right where you are and every step along the way as well. And sometimes we feel stuck. Sometimes you might say that Sarah feels stuck, and I need to be authentic and listen to her to make sure I'm not part of the reason why she's stuck. And I believe that what's going to happen just with the situation with Sarah is that we're going to walk a couple of different paths, and she's going to find out, oh, well, I didn't realize what that meant. Oh, okay. But at least you'll have something to compare it to then, right?
What? Even if let's say she moves out and she doesn't like it, and then she moves back in.
Right.
She has that experience. You know what I mean?
Right.
And part of what you said reminded me of, I just want to say this out loud. It's important. I think it's important. And I know you believe this 100%, Deborah, that just because someone has a disability doesn't mean you can't learn and grow. And, in fact, we're all human. We're all on a journey. We all are moving towards our human potential. So anyone we can all feel stuck. And it doesn't mean that, I think that's part of that narrative too about this, where it's like, well, if you have a disability, you're just, your life is just in this little box.
Right.
It's not the case.
And if you have a disability in certain countries, you can get culturally stuck, and there's all kind of ways that you can get stuck in society. Right now, that's why we're having these conversations, because a lot of people in society don't understand truly that we're not just saying this, but many people with disabilities, especially severe disabilities, have a lot to add. And there is, we're finding such interesting stories about just the interview we had with Sandy Carter, talking about the virtual reality and, how the teams needed to be diverse. Yeah. And as a society, we're figuring out that people with disabilities really, truly can add value to the workforce to the innovation and to the bottom line, and not just the workforce, to society as a whole. And so if you are feeling stuck for whatever reason, and sometimes, once again, like with Viktor Frankl, sometimes you're stuck because you're in an awful situation. I had a friend of mine that went to prison because he's a very, very good gardener, and he chose to grow the wrong plant. You probably can figure out what plant that is, and it's illegal in Virginia, and he was growing this plant in 2 different counties and on park property. And they're sort of funny about that. And so he actually went to prison for 18 months. Now talk about stuck.
Right.
Here is this really really great man, very creative and innovative, that made, a bad entrepreneurial decision, but he was stuck, and he was being told in this situation constantly that he was a bad person because he was in jail. You're in prison. Obviously you're bad.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to walk that with him, because I chose to be there with him, and I visited him and I sent him letters and we talked about it. And I said, you have no choice but be here in that situation. What can you learn? What can you do? When are you ever in your life going to have time when you don't have to cook, you don't have to go anywhere?
Sabbatical. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I know that it's a bad situation, but he was in this situation. So what can you learn and what can you contribute?
That's right.
And how are you going to use these experiences for the rest of your life?
That's right.
I'm not saying he wasn't traumatized. He was. And I'm not saying that, he should have been growing, this crop on lands that didn't belong to him when it was. I'm not saying any of that.
That's not the point. The point is he still has a choice. He has a choice, even if he can't, he can't break out of jail. But his choice is, what can you do? I mean, I think about Nelson Mandela and all the years that he spent in prison and how much transformation. There's so many stories of people who've gone into prison, and in prison they actually found the spiritual freedom to do, to change and transform. And they came out, and far from being stuck, they came out and they were different people.
Right.
So exactly, jail is a great example. And again, it just goes back to the idea that we can always, as human beings, I think this is one of the cool things about human beings and human potential. If you're if you're a chair, where do you find the chair? Just where you last put it, right? But as human beings, we never have to be stuck in that way, because we have creativity, we have resourcefulness, we have initiative, and we can ask for support. So that's the other piece. Sometimes if we, that's what's great about community. If we don't know the answer, I mean, I don't know, Deborah, but I know so many times where I felt stuck, I could have a conversation with someone else, and then all of a sudden I realized that there were things options I didn't see because I just got stuck within myself.
Right.
There's always something, and even if we're stuck, in our bodies, even if we're stuck in our bodies. I mean, I think about Rosemary.
Right.
And I mean, how much does she do? Even though one might look at her and say, "Oh, she's stuck."
Right. I know, and Rosemary is a great example, because I know often when she travels, somebody's trying to help her and they won't look and talk to Rosemary. They'll talk to her assistant or to her mother, and Rosemary can hear.
Yeah, she's perfectly capable.
Right. Yeah, she might not communicate with you in a traditional manner, but she's there.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate her, because she's really got a lot to offer. And I'm seeing more and more individuals with disabilities really stepping up and finding their place in the world. And it's very exciting. And we have to honor them by continuing to tell their stories, not as inspirational porn or any of that. And it's like, oh, isn't it great that no, but to just continuing to remind all of us that people come in all different shapes and sizes, and we shift and change, and who I was yesterday is maybe not who I am today. And I think we made so many different assumptions about ourselves and other people. So if you are an individual that's feeling stuck, where do we begin? And I'll just start. The other day I was feeling stressed out at work, and I loved my work, but I was feeling stressed out. And I thought, all right. And normally what I do is just push through it, but then it actually will make me more anxious. It's probably my ADHD. And so what I did was I thought, I'm going to take a break. And so I stopped and I went outside, and like you said, I live in the country and it's so beautiful there. And I just walked around a little bit, and it was amazing how much calmer I got.
Right.
And I thought, this, Deborah, why don't you practice it? But sometimes I forget.
Well, exactly. We all do.
So what other tips do we have for getting unstuck?
Absolutely. I think one of the number one things is to realize that, first of all, stuckness is just information.
Right.
If you're feeling stuck, and I think you said this, Deborah, too, ask yourself, what's going on that I feel stuck? What is that about? Right? I'm feeling stuck. Does that, and then what do I need to do to take care of myself in that stuckness? So if
Right.
you're at a job and you feel stuck, right? And then you start thinking about it and you go, well, I can't ever leave because I'll never be able to make, I'll just die
Right.
if I leave this job, right?
Fear
Yeah.
comes in.
Slow down and be like, okay, so what's going on? I have a lot of fear happening. What do I need to do to take care of myself right now? Well, maybe I need to call a friend. Maybe I need to calm myself down. Maybe I need to go for a walk, right? I'm catastrophizing here. The chances are this is not the only job in the world that will ever get or that could ever get. I won't die if I did something else, right? And then I think the other piece is thinking about, if again, I really think that when you're stuck, it means you're bumping up against your own growth. That there's actually, instead of thinking of it as something negative, think of it as, I must be growing in some way. I'm growing in some way, and I need something more. I need more challenge. I'm missing something. My soul is wanting something more. What is that more? And do some journaling
Yeah, I
about
agree.
what that more is, right? And honor, the pieces. Then figure out, it's like the Serenity Prayer, what you can change and what you can accept. But
Right.
there's always something we can change, and even if that something we can change is our attitude and our approach to life, there's always something we can change. And many, many times, especially for those of us who live in the US and live in, developed countries, we have way more freedom than we ever imagine ourselves to have.
Right.
And so that's where I would start. Those are some good places to start to get, to move from stuckness to thinking about action.
I agree. And I think really looking at the information, because I
Yeah.
remember even since I founded Rue Global, I believe it March 1st, 2013 was the day that I registered the
Oh, wow.
company. Yeah. And there have been times during that where there were projects I was working on or, certain types of work. And I remember thinking, I don't really want to do this kind of work. And so I would stop and say, okay, well, first of all, you should be grateful that the clients are giving you this work so you can pay your bills and your employee. Okay, I get all that, Deborah.
Right.
But what is it? What is it? What information am I being told here? And there was a time when I really wanted to move more, which we've done, to the pure marketing communications. How do we tell this real good, solid, grounded stories about human potential?
Yeah.
And what was happening when I first went back on my own, which you would expect, the market was saying, oh, so you must be an ICT accessibility company because that's what your old firm did, Tech Access. And not that I don't, we do some of that. We
Right.
do, because if you're a brand and you're saying, I want to include people with disabilities as employees and as consumers, your website, your products and services need to be accessible. Okay. Because otherwise, we're not really sure if you are truly committed to include us. So,
Right.
I mean, there's part of it, but I wanted to be more. I wanted to have a different conversation. As a matter of fact, that's when I started working with you as my producer, because I was like, Doug, what I really want to do is go do what we're doing now.
Yeah.
But at the time, I felt that I was really still in the older conversations. And so, how do I listen to the information, honor where I am, make a plan, start walking the plan, and then of course as you walk the plan you're like, oh, let me tweak it here. For
Right.
example, when I first started, I think that
Hmm. I think we might have lost. Hi, Deborah. Can
Oh,
you hear
sorry.
me?
All of a sudden
No problem.
yeah, sorry about that.
So, yeah, so if you could just pick up from what you were just saying last.
Yeah, I just think that sometimes when we're feeling stuck, we have to understand that we need to learn from it. What does it mean? What does the
Yeah,
fear mean? If you're feeling fear, and I know that generally when I'm feeling stuck, there is some fear in there. And so, what am I afraid of? Am I afraid of I'm not adding value? That I don't have anything to offer the world?
right.
Am I afraid that I think I'm so all that and you're not? And oh, well, you better get a PhD to do whatever your fear is. And so looking at that and learning from it. And I'm a big journaler. I also journal, and I will also speak to the microphone too.
Hmm.
But I think learning from it, coming up with a plan for then,
Yeah,
the near future and all the way down, and being willing to come to keep tweaking it and the plan along the way, because as you learn more information, you do have to tweak the plan,
that's right.
because and so that's some of the ways I've done it. And also, if somebody is holding you back, they've decided that you can't add value because you have a disability, for example, or you can't move out because you're a grown woman with trisomy
Right.
21, and who's going to take care of you? So
Yeah,
I think you have to keep having the dialogues with either the people that are accidentally, causing you to be stuck, and with yourself, and with, like you said, your friends. And,
yeah.
you can join conversations like this on human
That's
potential.
that's what the community is for. That's what this community is
Right,
for.
right. Because I think we all get stuck sometimes. And so, how did you get unstuck in a situation? And I think learning from each other, and then telling the stories of people that said,
Yeah,
I might be in this situation now, but I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to add the most value where I am right this second. And then I'm going to continue to grow and add value. And I'm going to work really hard to get unstuck.
that's right. That's right. I agree. I completely agree.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's an important conversation, though, because I think there's times when all of us feel stuck. And sometimes it's because society is saying we're not capable of something. I'll give you another silly example. It wasn't silly at the time. I was working in the mortgage banking field, and I was in technology and training. I was a training director. And a very large credit card company contacted me and said, we're looking for somebody to run our corporate university. And that's what I did for a living. And they said, we really would like somebody with a PhD. Well, yeah, then I'm not your girl, because I don't have a PhD. And I told them that, and they said, no, you have so much amazing background, come in and do it anyway. So
Yeah.
I came in for the interviews, and it was intense interviewing, and they were very impressed with me. At the end, they contacted me and said, we decided to go with another candidate. We selected somebody that had a PhD, and we didn't select you because you don't. And I thought, but you knew I didn't have
Right. You told me to come in.
Well, are you torturing me? Did you torture me because you needed to have at least 3 people to interview? Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my depression and everything kicked in and said, see, you'll never amount to anything, Deborah. You don't
Right.
have a master's degree or a PhD. What are you thinking?
Right.
And I had to walk past those demons. And it's interesting. Around that time, not that long afterwards, is when I decided to become an entrepreneur and actually create Tech Access after that. Because I thought, you know what? You might not realize that I'm great and valuable, but I am. So get out of my way and let me show you. But if I hadn't had that setback and somebody telling me I was stuck and I couldn't add value because,
Right.
maybe I wouldn't have moved forward to where I am now. So sometimes being stuck is a gift in our lives too.
Yeah. And, just lastly, I'll just say that, truly, I think just from a perspective of physics, there is no such thing as stuck. The universe is constantly in motion, and energy is constantly changing. So in a way, if you're feeling stuck all the time, it's an active process. You're actively telling yourself over and over and over again that you are stuck. And one day we should do a whole episode about the payoffs for being stuck.
Oh.
Like, because there are, as much as there are people. This is one thing I've learned too. There are times when it's easier to be stuck. It's more comfortable. It's more, so a whole other episode. But that could be its own episode about why we sometimes keep ourselves stuck. And I've done that.
Good one.
I've certainly done that. Yeah.
Yeah, we should do that next, because you're right. That's a really good one, and I have definitely done that too.
Okay,
so before we end the episode, I know that your baby was due yesterday. So just for our listeners, tell us what the doctor
What's
said.
going on? So the doctor said that the baby is coming one way or the other by Tuesday of next week. So they will not allow. They're going to induce my fiance next week, no matter what. And so far, nothing. So it's her first. So they said it just sometimes takes a while. So by next week, my daughter will be here. Her name is Eleanor Luz Foresta, and we're going to call her Ellie. For sure.
Oh, wow. We can't wait to meet Ellie. I'll see you at some point holding Ellie up and go, here she is.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. Well, we have you in our thoughts and prayers, you and
Deborah.
Your fiance, and we're looking forward to meeting Ellie. So thank you for everybody for joining us today on Human Potential at Work. And you can leave comments on our Facebook group, Human Potential at Work, and everybody's welcome. If you want to be part of the group, just ask to be a member and we will absolutely accept you. And we also welcome your comments on all the social media mediums as well. So Doug, thank you for joining me today. And we will take this up next time on the value. I mean, what do we get from being stuck? So thank you, Doug. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.